There is no cheat code to getting better at art. For years, I searched for one, and judging by the monumental quantity of videos on this platform that claim to hold the secret to art prowess, many others are searching as well. Are all of those videos lying then? No, I think not. But they are capitalizing on the desire of artists to grow quickly, to learn what they do not yet know, to obtain the same skills they see in artists that they look up to. There is a bit of clickbait involved, and it's frankly hard to fault them. It appeals to our sensibilities to look for the swiftest way to do a thing. If I can learn some secret move and skip several years of grueling practice to become an artist, you can bet a huge sum of money I'm going to take it. But frankly, no such thing exists. Art is a journey, and growth is hard. It's not good advertising for a video to simply tell you, yeah, you're just going to have to draw a lot if you want to get better at drawing. It draws a larger crowd to preach that these 10 quick tips will point you in the right direction. Now, before we get started proper, I want to clarify something. I am not disparaging all the other artists on the platform who do this, who claim to have a secret. I think in many cases they genuinely think they do have something substantial to teach, and that might actually be the case. But one thing is never going to be all that you need, and one thing is never going to apply to everyone. Many people find in those videos something to propel them forward, to give them hope, to give them a reason to keep making things for another week until despair again sets in, and each time that happens, the artist gets closer to their goal. Each of those videos and their promises can be like a carrot to pull you forward, and in that, they are actually immensely helpful. And you may have stumbled upon a trick that accelerated your progress tremendously in one such video. I have as well, and this occurs because we are meeting that particular strategy at the right stage of our journey, where that next piece of information was the exact link in our chain that we required, the next rung on our ladder as we climb upward. Okay, well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Zach, and thanks for listening. Several minutes of rambling in, I suppose it's time to actually begin. I thought this topic was a good one to explore for a couple of reasons. First of all, this notion of a secret ingredient can be very disheartening if you discover that the promised tips have not helped you along your path. Secondly, the idea that these necessary items exist can stop you from pursuing things in your own way, which is really important for most artists. Thirdly, the very notion indicates a falsehood, that art success is claimed by having the right keys as opposed to hard work and practice. Which of these speaks the most to you? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. So let's start with that first point, the discouragement that can come from thinking you simply need to find the right tool or tip in order to succeed. How many of you have watched a video or read an article that attempted to convince you that this particular program, this pen, this way of drawing characters would revolutionize your work, only to follow through and fall flat? I know I've been there. Many times I've tried to figure out what a particular artist does that allows them to make characters interesting, to make landscapes look like landscapes and not just a flat assortment of shapes. One of the most common questions on art videos and artwork across social media has to do with medium. What pen did you use? What program? What Photoshop brushes? What paper? The paper one is actually one that I frequently ask or look for on Instagram when I watch people putting together things, especially in mixed media, where they're laying down alcohol markers and brush pens and ink and colored pencil. I want to know what paper works well with that because I've had paper bleed so much. But I think somewhere in the back of my brain, I'm going, if I just had that paper, my art would look more like theirs. The implication here is really clear, right? Especially to the artist that is getting those questions. Implicitly, we think if I use the same tools as this artist, my artwork will obtain the same level of success, the same beauty. This is not a stupid notion, but it does miss some very important details. The artists we look up to are not successful because of the tools they use most of the time, but because of the skills that they have built up, the eyes that they have trained, and the mental library of information and images that they have amassed. When we seek that special thing, the secret ingredient to art success, we pursue the things that matter least, quite often. I have watched many artists over the course of the last 5 years, I suppose, work on these beautiful ink drawings. As you've seen from my videos and what's happening in the background here, I really enjoy working with ink. It's one of my favorite mediums to play with. It started back when I was in high school, when I first got to experiment with dip pens. And then over time, I was ecstatic to learn that I could actually get microns, which are that same quality of waterproof ink, but they're consistent. Ironically, in the last couple of years, I've gone away from that consistency because I find that using the exact device you're watching me use right here, a brush-tipped pen, it adds a level of artistry to things. It looks more traditional. It doesn't look artificial. But when I first got mine, I expected it to solve all kinds of problems. I knew that I could make really fine lines with it. I knew I could make broad swaths of black. I was really excited. In fact, I got it when I was heading on a little mini vacation down to Santa Fe back when I was still teaching. And I remember busting out this brush tip pen and immediately just felt my heart sink because it was so different than everything else that I had used. It was so difficult to use. And I think in the back of my mind, I was hoping / I thought that, oh, I have this now, so my work will look like Karl Kopinski's, for example. My work will be more akin to that of these other artists that I watch and that I admire. And of course it wasn't, because this was a very new medium, something that works like a pen, but that functions and has to be handled like a brush. Well, that was something new to me, something that I hadn't had any practice with. And so it took some time to learn how to use it. Unfortunately, I used it for about an hour or two, went, I guess this isn't for me, and put it away for, I think, a year before I finally got it back out. In recent history, I've started using them more just because I've been doing so much drawing, and I finally figured out how to use it. It still is something that I don't use perfectly all the time. There are many times, even this morning when I was drawing one of the dragon prompts for Smogist, that I didn't have my wrist at the right angle, and I wanted a really thin line, and it was not thin at all. I ended up bleeding things out. All of this to say that I, even at my age and my level of experience and having taught art for a decade, I still stumble upon this. I still think that a new medium or the right Photoshop brush is going to make things function the way that I want them to. When I first got an iPad to work on digital art, I thought this is going to be so much better than drawing on my tablet on computers, which I've always struggled with. And of course, when I downloaded Procreate and then started working with my nice new fancy iPad that my father got me for Christmas, I realized again that, oh yeah, it's just another tool that I'm going to have to learn. And it was very disheartening. It took me quite a long time to get to a point where I was at any level of proficiency. And frankly, I don't jump back into it often enough to maintain that level of proficiency. I will at some point, once I start diversifying my media a little bit again. Most of my art right now is working with pen, and I'm really excited that I've developed that proficiency there with another tool that for a long time was just stressful for me. I also recall a video by Marco Bucci, who's a wonderful artist, and if you haven't checked out his work, I will link him in the description down below because he's not only a fantastic artist, but a fantastic art teacher as well. Some of his videos actually inspired the way that I operate with these podcasts and with my sketchbook sessions. And he had a video he did a long time ago where he did a painting of Batman, and he was exploring the idea that digital brushes don't matter nearly as much as anyone thinks, and he did the whole painting in just the default round brush. And all of that was just to prove that the brush matters way less than anyone thinks. It's so much more about what's happening inside the mind of the artist. But that's not romantic and that's not fancy. We want that tool to fix our problems, A, because it's easier and who can fault us, and B, it kind of just goes into the storytelling we tell ourselves. Most of the books we read, that's how things operate. Most movies and videos that we enjoy watching, that's how things operate, right? The character stumbles themselves into something that allows them to start solving their problems, some new magic or some new entity or some new helper. It's not how real life works most of the time. Hardy Fowler actually was talking about this exact same thing on one of his most recent paintings, where he was working on a dragon and doing a demo on how, you can do something similar. And he actually talked about using just the round brush for a huge portion of it before he started going into the detail work. The brushes and the tools matter less than you think. I think the biggest issue here is how easy it is to fall into despair when you try out something and it doesn't give you that response. When you follow a tip that you thought would give you the answer to why you aren't progressing as an artist and it failed for you. Why didn't it work? Is this the confirmation that I need that I can't be an artist? Is this it? Is this as far as I go? And I've seen this a ton over the years. We desperately want answers to our artistic questions, and while our seniors and mentors can help us, so much of the pursuit is unlocking how your own brain dissects visual information. When I taught in the classroom daily, a huge part of my job was to figure out how the individual students in my classes thought. I would line out projects, get the students working, and try to spend the majority of my time talking to individual students. The whole reason for this was to find the individual struggle for that kid, that student, and to try to understand what they needed. When I worked with shading, for example, some students understood innately that what they were doing was simulating three-dimensionality. They understood that, of course, this needs shaded. The nose is going to cast a shadow. For them, the instruction was likely more based on technique, how to get the shading to be more gradual, blending techniques, or subtle adjustments to the bone underneath the skin. Other students, though, struggled to understand the form of the object in general, and just needed to start with realizing that shading in and of itself can give you multiple levels of darkness. This might seem silly, but for a lot of students, the idea that you can press harder or more softly with a pencil will give you different results. Be careful not to look down on people who come from that background. If you haven't drawn much, if a pencil has only ever been wielded to write or to solve math problems, you don't always have those subtleties in the back of your mind. And still, other students might be focused entirely on drawing the details, copying exactly from the source material but learning little from the reference. And even others were stuck drawing the forms that they had memorized for years, and they had to focus on learning that eyes are not actually circles and noses are not triangles. So if I were to tell that class that the one thing they needed to know was that shading is simply the illustrating of the absence of light on the opposite side of the form to the light source, only some of the students would benefit from that tip. Those who understood enough or took the concept and ran with it would feel excited. For them, that tip worked. It was the secret ingredient that they needed. The others, however, the vast majority, would simply watch as the gap increased between them and their seniors, wondering if they would ever manage to grasp the concepts. This is a simple example, but I think it illustrates the discouragement that can come from the assumptions that we will find particular secrets to art success. Sometimes a tip will be just what you need in that moment, but most of the time that will simply not be the case. If you find that you often succumb to this or are tempted by the desire to look for the secret, to look for something that is going to give you that answer to level up your art skills, try to be gracious with yourself. It's not a weird place to come from. I have done it, and most artists in my life have done it, because it's very human. And for a lot of areas in our life, that is actually how things work. You find that you're sick because you have a vitamin deficiency. Well, often that issue is solved by introducing a food that is going to give you that thing. If you find that you're often fatigued and anxious, and then nail down that, it's because I'm getting a lack of sleep, you can increase the amount of sleep you get and work towards solving that problem. Skills, though, and especially creative skills, don't often have those simple solutions. And so while it's not unreasonable to look for it, for most of us, it's not going to be that simple, and that's okay. It's still worth dedicating the time to understanding yourself and thinking about what you want to do artistically. But give yourself some grace when you find out that maybe this is how you've been pursuing things, and especially try to dismantle some of your anxiety and stress when you realize that's probably not going to work. Another huge issue I see regarding the notion of a secret art ingredient is that it can often halt an artist's normal pursuits. Left to our own devices, we often search in peculiar ways, finding out what works for us individually, sifting through the pieces that we have available. Today, with the internet, we have access to everything we could ever want, and therein lies the problem. There is simply too much. If you want to take a beginner art course right now just to learn the basics, how do you go about that? Perhaps you start with a Google search, only to find that there are 10,000 options. Okay, overwhelmed, but maybe we can move forward with this. Perhaps you try YouTube and maybe find some other artists that are recommending things. Great. But are the videos with the most views pointing you in the best direction? Or are they just the ones that have been seen the most? Gumroad then, or Masterclass, or Skillshare? Again, so many options. Many people at this point simply abandon the search entirely, despairing quickly due to simply being overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. But many will pick a direction and go. There's nothing wrong with this at a base level. In fact, when we were younger, taking an art class here or there, we followed the instructions of teachers, did we not? We learned alongside others. But for most artists of the past, and likely most of the artists you admire, there was a different approach, or at least their approach had some other components to it. Most of them trailblazed for themselves, at least in part. I would go out on a limb and say that embarking on your own as an artist, figuring out how you learn, how you want to work, and what strategies work for you, is one of the most fundamental components of being an artist. This notion that there is a secret ingredient, that you must simply find the missing piece, can be hamstringing your independent search. Now, this might come across a little strange, though. It might come across like I'm saying you shouldn't take classes, every artist needs to learn on their own. And that risks dipping into the territory of, you shouldn't use references. You should always draw from imagination, blah, blah, blah. And that is really not what I'm going for here. What I'm trying to articulate is the fact that if you really fundamentally think that there is a particular right way to do the thing, that you're less likely to allow yourself the independence and the freedom to search for what works best for you. And this is just a really human thing. And your highest degree of success is most likely going to come from doing a hybrid of the two. By finding classes, teachers, free things here on YouTube that teach you how to work on whatever techniques you want to work on, and following them until they don't make sense for you. And allowing yourself some freedom, not assuming that you're wrong because you're the younger artist, because this professional or this teacher said this and that didn't work for you, so clearly something's wrong with you. Be really careful not to slip into that, because artists are a different breed of human, and we don't all follow the same pathway. And this was what made teaching art such a unique thing. I used to talk to a lot of my colleagues, and my math teacher or science teacher colleagues did almost all of their prep work. All of the difficulty in their job was before the students showed up. If a chemistry teacher was teaching a specific lesson, they needed to make sure everything was prepped. But more than that, they needed to make sure that their knowledge was prepped, because in most of those fields, there's simply too much to know to always have it right in the back of your mind at any given time. Even for the math teachers, they wanted to review the techniques that they'd used in the past, the way to teach this particular trigonomic function or whatever it might be. The ironic part of this was the art teacher's prep and the music teacher's prep, for a large part, if you're working on directing an orchestra or band, is very little outside of class time. My class prep was pretty relaxed, get everything lined out, make sure I have my slideshows, reference pieces, I have all my materials lined out. But for the most part, my work was during the class. And it was adjusting to the individualized needs of every single student in there. And it just made the task very different. Because, again, my math teacher and science teacher colleagues would essentially teach the same lesson for every section of that class they had. Their workload was very, very similar. But for me, if my first, second, and third period were all the same class, maybe it's painting 1, I am going to have totally different classes, because I can have students in one class who are missing some really fundamental pieces of knowledge, who aren't helping each other learn, who are just feeling really insecure about their artistic pursuits, who have taught themselves over the years that they can't do it, or maybe their parents told them that art is worthless, so they have no confidence in themselves. Those kind of things show up in other classes, but the amount of adaptability that you have to have as an art teacher is a different thing entirely. I know this because I got to coach teachers, I got to be in lots of other classes. So it's not just coming from like, woe is me as the art teacher, my job's harder. I'm not saying my job was harder, but I tutored math. I helped in science classes. I ran the music and the art department. So I was involved in a lot of different areas. And it was just an interesting thing for me, where my prep time was so chill compared to my math and science and history colleagues. But the in-class time would often leave me exhausted because in that moment, I'm having to sit there and answer questions that I did not anticipate. Because when I assigned a project, I had no idea which direction the students were going to go with it. So all of that to say that you have to be careful when you try to understand yourself as an artist, because artists are way more different from one another than most other categories of thing. If we're looking at engineers, if we're looking at musicians, in general, they're going to be more similar to each other than artists are to other artists. And I don't necessarily know why this is. If you think you have an idea why, I would love to hear about it in the comments. I would love to have a podcast with a couple other artists at some point and just hash these kinds of things out, because we are such interesting, weird, and unique people that we come to all these different kind of solutions and ideas and concepts about things. But the whole purpose of discussing this is just so you don't assume that because this professional artist, this art teacher said, this is the way you have to do it, and it doesn't work for you, that there's something wrong with you. You are most likely going to have to find your own path forward, at least in part, as to how you pursue things creatively. It's why art classes are a lovely, awesome thing, and they can also be crippling in some ways, because you can be with all those other people watching them use particular tools and strategies that work for them, and then wonder why they don't work for you, or assume that they should work for you. It's just not how it always functions. Sometimes it is, but you have to be gracious with yourself and understand that the landscape is pretty diverse and pretty hard to decipher at a lot of levels. All right, let's move into the third area here. Fundamentally, the idea that there is a secret ingredient flies in the face of what the skill of art is. It is a series of hundreds of micro skills learned and accumulated over time, and augmented by a continually growing library of techniques, strategies, and perhaps most importantly, a large and dynamic visual library. I know I've said it a lot on the channel and it's a little trite, but art is a journey. The reason that we use that term in the community is because maybe the English language lacks another term that's better. What the word journey implies is that it takes time, that it is traveling, that you will probably come out the other side different. My brain goes back to, Pilgrim's Progress, or Frodo and Sam traversing all the way to Mordor. They were not the same people by the time they got there. The journey dramatically changed them. And your art journey, should you choose to stay on it long enough to achieve whatever goal, is going to change you. It is going to require different things than you thought it would. You're going to abandon things halfway through the journey. You're going to pick up new things. Don't pick up any golems you see on the side of the road. They generally works out poorly, but your journey will change you, and your journey will change from what it was at the point of origin to what it is at the end. This is just inevitable. When you understand that, you can escape some of the downfalls of thinking that there's a secret ingredient, that there's some special thing that you need. The first thing that you can escape is the idea that progress can be or should be or will be incredibly quick. This is one of the reasons I think that so many people pick up art and then abandon it really quickly. It's why there have been points in my life where I've wondered if art is worth working on, whether it's something that I can actually even learn to do. And it's because progress is much, much slower, I think, than people expect it to be. I don't know of any other skills that are like this. Writing, perhaps, is one that I run into. Writing is a skill that progresses really slowly, and that maybe you don't get that much better on unless you're working on specific things. This is something that I run into with art as well, though. I assumed for a very long portion of time that as long as I kept working on art, as I just put more time into drawing and painting, that I would naturally progress. There is some truth to that. If you draw for an hour every single day, I think you probably will continually get better. But the rate at which you get better is not going to be consistent. And it's probably going to be an asymptote. At some point, it's going to come down to this very slim margin of improvement over the course of years. No, indeed, when it comes to improving a skill, you have to focus on specific things. Right now, as I work through all these dragons, part of the reason why I like these kinds of drawing challenges is I am looking up references and focusing on specific skills with each one. There's a couple that are later on, one in particular I'm thinking about now that was plant, and I looked up a whole bunch of strangler fig leaves and branches and the fruit as well, and started working through how I can show those at a whole bunch of different angles. Working on the wood textures, working on the leaves themselves was beneficial, and fortunately that project took me a couple hours, so the skills will actually probably stay in my head for a long time. There's a lot of strategy when it comes to working on developing skills for art things, but the biggest problem with thinking that there's some secret notion that you need to understand or grasp is that it can give you this artificial sense of how fast you ought to be progressing. It can put you in a place where you search for the answer instead of just working hard as well. This is something I've been really, really guilty of. And honestly, judging by the videos on this platform, I assume a lot of other people have as well. There's an idea in my head that if I'm working on putting together references, I'm studying art, I'm learning about art, that it is progress. And frankly, I don't think it is. Progress in art comes from making art strategically, looking at the things that you want to improve and focusing on those. I have tricked myself for huge portions of my life into thinking I'm putting time into art. I'm getting better at art because I'm researching things, because I'm planning. That's just not the same. When I write, I think it does actually improve things. When I write out chapter outlines, when I do research, it does seem to actually help. But artistically, most of your progress, 90% plus of your progress, is going to come from actually doing the thing. And a lot of us succumb to this. It's my biggest issue, I think, with art progress over the years is that I spent so much time searching for the right tool, the right program, the right technique, the right strategy, instead of just trying to do the thing, failing at it, and then getting a little bit better when I do it the next time. And that really is the simplicity of art. And I think that's the biggest problem, the biggest hindrance that can come with assuming that there's some secret that you need to learn, some secret ingredient, some special sauce that's going to help you achieve art prowess, is that it just takes you away from the reality that there is no secret ingredient. Art is just the product of hard work and practice and dedication. And that's hard to wrap your head around because that's simple. And we all kind of know that at a base level. If you want to get better at a sport, if you want to get better at running, like you just got to do the thing. In those senses, maybe it is actually easier because you can just do the thing. You don't have to try to like do the thing better every single time by focusing and doing little bits of research and trying to figure out how feathers function and which way the bristles go. But at a fundamental level, I think they are very, very similar. But we don't want that to be the case because that's time, that's effort, it's hard, and we know that. It's why so many people walk away from art, because it is hard. But it's worth it, even though it is difficult. This can lead you to focus on the wrong things too, rather than the things that you need to work on to progress, and perhaps most importantly, the things that you enjoy. I had a couple students over the years, one of whom unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was in my class when he was 10 years old, and he enjoyed being in class with me, but was just not that good of an artist, as he would have said it. He spent a lot of time working on things. He didn't slack off. He wasn't lazy, but his art never really went much of anywhere. And he kept trying to do the exact same things all the time. However, I think it was his senior year of high school, he tried painting for the first time. He tried something different. It was really, really rough for him at first. But he went out on faith and continued to work and hone those skills. And because he had a group of people in there that he enjoyed being with. He had spent a lot of time with me. We got to talk about Star Wars. He eventually managed to like crack in his mind what he needed to in order to understand painting at a fundamental level. And all of a sudden, he was having more fun and more success artistically than he ever had before. And it was just because he had put in the time to get to where he wanted to be. And there wasn't anything romantic. He didn't really have an epiphany one day. It was just working through the same thing constantly. And this kid who thought he wasn't an artist, who didn't think he had any skill or had the ability to gain any skill in that area, managed to do some amazing pieces. He had this really awesome painting of a strawberry that he did as a senior who had never painted before. And it was just this moment of success that he held on to and he really, really loved. All right, so what do we do with all this knowledge? I don't like taking a podcast or any kind of video and just expanding on a thing ad nauseum without talking about like what we can do about it. Like, we all search for these secret ingredients because we desperately want there to be something that's going to answer our questions. It's going to make our art pursuits easier. So what do we do about it? The search for an answer to your artistic question is totally understandable. I get it. And perhaps you, if you don't give yourself any grace about it, you should get it too. You should understand this. We desperately want an answer to what to do next, how to obtain our goals, but I fear it's just not that simple. So here are some tips that are totally not the right answers, but just some observations of mine over the years. Things that work for me, things that work for others in my life, things that work for students perhaps. Really, they are just things to remember, I suppose. In fact, they aren't really tips, they are just reminders that we all need to know and think about and hold in the back of our head as we move forward. The series of caveats here, as I was putting this script together, comes from the fact that this whole podcast is about how there isn't a secret ingredient. So it's not what I'm trying to bait and switch here. It's just, these are some things that might help you remember the reality of what art is, so that you aren't succumbing to that. Well, maybe if I just get this pen, if I just figure out, Loish's strategy for making characters, it'll all make sense. First of all, strap in for the long haul. Remember, it's going to be a journey. Figure out a way to enjoy it. Find some people to go along on it with you, but strap in for the long haul. It's worth it. I promise you. Pursuing art is worth it just because it'll make your own life better. Practice things that are in line with what you want to do. Don't succumb to the notion that these are the fundamentals and therefore you have to start with them. I am an art teacher and the fundamentals are important, but the fundamentals are important for very particular and specific reasons. And if you focus only on the fundamentals, or you think that working on the fundamentals will help you draw dragons better, there's going to be too much space between those things. So make sure that you're always focusing on things that are enjoyable for you, and more importantly, that are geared towards your specific goals. If your specific goal is to draw characters, but you're studying fundamentals that have nothing to do with drawing people, you are doing the wrong thing. Try to find some time to do both. Engage in activities that bring you joy. If you are focusing on a lot of artistic growth, but you're not putting much time into the things that really are exciting for you artistically, then step back from the other things you're doing and make sure you're doing things that bring you joy. Because it's such a long journey, if you don't have things that are fun, you're probably not going to stick to it. Try new things. I've talked about this before in just the sense that you never know when you're going to discover a new love. I like to think about this with food. Think of your favorite dish that you didn't have at home when you were growing up. For me, this is probably Indian or Thai food, things that my mother didn't cook, but when I ran into them, I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. That's how it is artistically sometimes. You discover a new thing, a new love, and it's exciting. So try new things, try new subject matters, try new media, try new ways of doing things. Make friends and build community in whatever way you can. If you're younger, take art classes locally at a community college, whatever it might be. Run into other people. Try to find smaller YouTube channels where you've got an artist that's able to respond to every single comment. There are a lot of artists in the community we have on Discord that have YouTube channels. Go find them, follow them, because you're going to be able to interact with them as human beings. That's a wonderful thing. And like I just mentioned, we have a Discord community. The link for it's in the description down below. And it is just a small community that you can interface with other artists, and it's important to get feedback on your work, but it's also important just to be an artist among other artists. Seek mentors that do what you want to do. If you can find these in person where you can actually interact with them, that's best, but that's not what most of us are going to be able to do. So find them on their media and try to figure out how they do things. Don't fall into the temptation of assuming that because this person is a professional artist, their methodologies, their strategies are going to work for you. But if you find an artist that literally does exactly what you want to do, there's a much higher chance that what they're doing is going to be something that you can metabolize and utilize. And lastly, have fun. The more fun you're having, the more joy you're having, the easier it is to stick to this for the long haul. And I want you to stick to this for the long haul, because the world is made better by more artists being in it and actively creating. Really, all that this list comes down to is whatever you can do to keep making art, do that. The longer you make it, the more you make, the higher chance you have of obtaining whatever goal it is that you are seeking. And the more skills and tools you'll have at your disposal to readjust and make sure that you're doing that correctly. Well, as always, thanks for tuning in. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you feel like I missed something. If there was something that I was wrong about or I missed, I need to hear that, because that's just the only way that I'm going to be able to adjust things and make sure that these videos and podcasts are more helpful moving forward. Thank you to patron Who, What, Where, When, and my other patrons as well for supporting me in the work that I do here on the channel. If you want to check out the Patreon, we have access to some exclusive videos there, study sessions of particular things, especially with the dragons as of late, but also the ability to vote on videos, to see updates, scripts, and outlines early. There's a lot of benefits there. I would encourage you to check it out if you have any desire, but I know that's not an option for everyone. Your time here, your comments, and just being here with me with the video is a lovely support in and of itself. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.